All right, guys, welcome to a fabulous new year, to another edition of the BS of Entrepreneurship podcast. Woo, are y'all excited?
I am. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year. Woo, I'm excited. Well, here's my question. Have you ever thought about how do I go about getting money to help my business that I may not have to pay back? Well, if you have, you are in the right place today. Today, we're going to cover grant writing and some of the do's, some of the don'ts. What are the things that you may need to do and to position yourself better to get a grant? And today we have Ms. Lynn Matthews. Let me do the proper introduction. Lynn, she's an award-winning communication and fundraising professional with over 25 years of experience in event planning, copywriting, grant and proposal development, public relations, and marketing. She currently serves as the Senior Advancement and Communications Officer for Youth Prizes, a Minnesota-based nonprofit that advances equity for BIPOC youth. Locally, her experience includes working with nonprofits such as Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Washington and Millwood. She has also worked in the corporate sector for several Black-owned government contractors in the DMV. Lynn is also the owner and principal consultant for Advancement for Equity Impact, which provides fundraising and communication support for nonprofits and for-profit entities in the social sector. Her personal life experiences have given her keen interest in working with nonprofits that actively seek to advance racial equity as a core part of their mission. Lynn is a graduate of University of Maryland College of Journalism. She sits on the board of Family Equity Partners and is a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. Welcome, Ms. Lynn Matthews.
Happy Founders Day.
Thank you.
Happy Founders Day.
Got the blue on.
Yes, I see.
Represent,
One of my favorite colors.
Represent.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to jump into this real quickly. And let me ask you this. And you were asking a question just earlier, and that's where I wanted to start.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to start too.
Okay.
About what is a grant for people who don't know. What is a grant?
Okay.
How do I get it? What is that money?
It's money.
Is it free money? How do I get it? Can I start a business with a grant? All of those type of questions were one-time questions that I asked. I never actually started to write a grant, but I talked to other people like, can you write a grant? Okay, so how easy is it? So those are kind of the questions. How easy is it? Should we employ someone to write the grants for us? And what type of businesses get funded?
Okay.
Okay.
That was a lot. Okay. Well, we'll start with what is a grant. A grant, it is money. It is usually free money. And it's money that usually comes from either a government source or a corporate source or like a foundation, like a philanthropic foundation that has a mission to give to certain causes. And so they will give you money, and it basically generally is free. I don't want to say there are no strings attached to it, but it's usually free money. So when you go after a grant, you want to look at, and let me know if I'm getting ahead or if you have some other questions. Okay. So when you're going after a grant, generally we're talking about nonprofits, not so much businesses. There are some grants for businesses, but for the most part, my experience has been working with nonprofits, particularly nonprofits that are serving in the human services area and are looking to advance racial equity. So that's basically what my experience is. But when you're going after a grant, well, even backing up before that, when you're thinking about like starting a nonprofit organization, you want to make sure that you know that there's going to be some funding out there if you don't have deep pockets, because everybody doesn't have. Some people have money; they can fund their own nonprofit.
Okay.
Right.
But for the rest of us, we need a little help. So you want to make sure that you know what it is that you want to do, and you want to look at what need it is that you're trying to meet. So for example, organizations in the DC, in the DMV, there are a lot of organizations that serve young people that provide, like Boys and Girls Clubs that provide that type of service, like youth development, things that are associated with education, out of school time programs. So you want to look at what your niche is. If you want to go into that, you need to think about, well, is what it is that I want to do, is somebody else already doing that? Is the field already saturated? Because that's going to make it that much more difficult for you to get money if there are already 150 other organizations out there doing what it is that you want to do. And if you do still want to go into that, you need to think about, what is my niche? What is it that I have to offer? What am I doing differently from these other organizations? And that's something that's very important when you go for a grant, because what you have to do, you really have to distinguish yourself from the other organizations, especially if you're going into a field that is already crowded. So, for example, one of the things that I think about, I worked, and I will use Melwood as an example. That was an organization that I was actually employed by. They do a lot of workforce development, but there are other people who do workforce development. But their niche was working with individuals with disabilities. So that set them apart from all of the other, organizations that are doing just workforce development where they're trying to get people jobs.
Oh, okay.
So you want to look at that to see what niche it is that you can fill that nobody else is doing, or that no one else is doing well. Okay. Otherwise, you'll end up starting a nonprofit and thinking that you're going to do all of this stuff, and you're not able to get money because there are other organizations out there. There are all these other organizations out there competing for the money. So you want to keep that in mind. What else did you ask? I probably have gone a little bit off.
When you get this grant, is it, do they set you up for so many years, or is it year to year that you have to continue to request the funding, or they give it to you like a project?
It depends.
Okay.
It depends. So let me start by talking about the different types of grants that there are in terms of the entities that give grants. So you have government grants, which the federal government gives grants, state governments give grants, local government, municipalities will give grants. So you have the public funding. That's called public funding. Then you have private funding. So you have private institutional funding, which is basically foundations, and these are philanthropic organizations that have money that they want to give specifically for philanthropic purposes. And so in that case, for the most part, you usually write a grant, and there's a review process that it goes through, and it depends on the foundation as to how long it takes, and then how they review. Some will have like board members review the grant. Some of them, it's about all of them really is about developing a relationship with the people at the foundation so they know who you are, and you're not just sending in your grant blind where nobody knows, your organization or anything like that. And then you have like corporations that will give grants or sponsorships. So like, a Pepsi or Coca-Cola or Giant Food.
What is the reasoning that a Pepsi or Coca-Cola would want to give a grant?
Okay.
To someone.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you have your corporate grants. Generally speaking, they're going to want some sort of publicity, or they will give you money, but it's usually tied, whether it's officially tied or whether there's just kind of an understanding that you will help with publicity. So because they want to look good. I mean, corporations want to look good. They want to look like they care for the people that are buying their products.
Okay.
So there's usually, like if it's tied to an event, like event sponsorships are really big. When you see things that are sponsored by Coca-Cola, sponsored by events are really big. But also many corporations, they have certain priority areas that they are interested in. And so if your program fits in one of their priority areas, they will want once they give you the grant, they'll want like a press release. They want you to write a press release. They want to make sure you're sharing on social media that Pepsi or Coca-Cola or whoever it was gave you that grant. So they're looking for some publicity, and it's a marketing thing. But that's not to say that it isn't altruistic and they don't really care about the people that they're giving grants to. But generally, that's the difference between a foundation grant, which really is. Foundations, depending on the type of foundation, those are really organizations that give philanthropically. They're not necessarily looking for any publicity around it. They're not necessarily looking for some sort of event or anything like that. They're really looking for you to make an impact in the community. So that's the difference. But and I can't say that dogmatically about all of them, but generally speaking, that's the difference between a foundation and a corporation. And with a government grant, what they're looking for, they basically are looking for organizations to carry out the things that you look to the government for. So, for example, domestic violence programs or homeless shelters, things like that, where the government, like a local government, may be charged with making sure that people are off the streets. So they would fund a shelter. They might fund a shelter program to take care of something that the government can't necessarily do, if that makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense.
Would it make sense for a traditional business entrepreneur, business owner, or is it normal that a traditional business also has a nonprofit portion of it that they can get money from the government? It sounds like, actually this is probably a two-part question, that they would write a grant proposal to the government, the state, the local municipalities to get funding for that nonprofit, even though they are for-profit. How would they keep that separately? And the second part is, when we write the grant, would we then submit it to all of the entities, or would we focus it narrowly because we're niche to that one specific government, state, local, the person who want Mr. Howe from the Gilligan's Island who wants to be a philanthropic? Okay,
so I would say, for your first question, in terms of keeping it separate, there are legal ramifications to that I'm really not qualified to answer. But what I can tell you is that there are large corporations that also have foundations, but they have a nonprofit foundation. But that foundation is like their philanthropic arm that they want to give money from that. But there are definitely some legal things in there where you have to keep them separate, depending on how that foundation or that nonprofit is structured. And then, so that's more of a legal, I don't want to steer somebody down the wrong
So as to the second part of the question, would you write the grant specifically for the federal government, the state government, the local government, or the philanthropic, or would you just write your grant and submit your proposal to all 3, 4, 5?
What's going to happen, especially with a government grant, is there's something that's called an RFP, request for proposal. And they will send out an RFP. Government proposals are like 50, 60, 70 pages. I mean, the RFP itself is 50, 60, 70 pages.
Wow.
And so you have to, basically read through the document. Now, foundations and corporations, they also have applications, or they want proposals, but they will give you specific questions that you need to answer. What I always recommend is that you do sort of like a boilerplate proposal that has everything that you do. It goes into your history, why you were founded, your mission statement, your vision statement, what your goals and objectives are, all the data that you have. There's a part of the proposal that's called a need statement, where you basically have to state the case that there is a need for what it is that you offer. So your need statement, and you do like a boilerplate proposal that has everything. And then when you go, that's not what you're going to submit to the fund when you're applying for a grant. That's not what you're going to submit, but you're going to use that document to pull from it based on the question. So the government may ask you, how many people do you anticipate serving, or what is your geographic focus? They may ask you specific questions. So you have this larger document that you can pull that information from. So each application is going to be different. There is something, and I'm not sure if they still use it, but it's called the Common Grant Application for Maryland. And there are some foundations that would take what's called this common application. And this is just one application that you can use and you can submit to different places. But those foundations would have to say that they accept that. And I'm not even sure that some of them still accept that form. But you definitely want to target your grant to match the questions that are being asked. And it's always good to do your research beforehand. And it's good to know who the program officers are, who's going to be reading that application. Because if you can kind of get a feel for, there are some organizations and people who are moved by emotion, by
names too.
it's always good to drop a name. Always good to drop a name if you can. But you have to be strategic about that too. But there are some people are really moved by the mission. And there are other people who are moved by, is this financially prudent? So you need to really understand who you're submitting this proposal to and what it is that's going to move them. And so when you write the proposal, you're even the tone of the language that you use. Proposals are generally there's not a lot of flowery. It's not like a marketing piece. It's not like it's not a hard sell. It's a softer sell. And you want to have your passion. You want to communicate your passion, but you want to communicate it with data. You want to be able to show. If we were to have, for example, for an example, if you were, and this was a couple of years ago, and I just remember this from working with the Boys and Girls Clubs, that there was a zip code in the southern part of Prince George's County where 80% of the young people who were in school had a parent who was engaged in the justice system. So they were either in prison or on probation. So to have some sort of program that focuses on children with parents who are incarcerated would make sense in that area because that's definitely a need. But if you were to go to Potomac, you might not need that.
Right,
it might be it might be a lower kind of a thing. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on that you're able to establish that there is a need for what it is that you have and speak to that need. And you do that with data. You can show, just looking up statistics. Not BLS. What is the thing that they do the census? The census. If you go onto the census website, excellent source for data. If you go onto different county websites, for Prince George's County, they have each department should have some statistics about education, about children, about test scores, about all of those different things. So you want to make sure that you're doing your homework.
What is the most that you have seen a grant for, that you have actually wrote a grant for, or seen someone write a grant for that you know of?
I've seen, not this, I didn't have anything to do with this one, but I've seen one that was $25 million. Yeah, $25 million.
What were they doing?
It was for an education program. And it was definitely a need. It was for education programming to get more Black and Hispanic teachers into classrooms. There's, I believe the last statistic that I saw that it's 2% of teachers all across the nation. 2% of teachers are Black males.
2% are Black males.
Black male in public schools. But Black male students make up much more than 2%. In public schools, make up much more than 2% of the population.
Absolutely.
So there are also studies that show that when that teacher looks like the student does better in those classrooms. So there was clearly a need for that. And this was not like a local grant. This was a national grant. So $25 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking about 4 or 5 different sites, then that $25 million, I'm sure.
Something like that, what would it cover? Is it covering like in addition to your salary?
That one was for a specific program
or training.
That one was for a specific program because I wasn't engaged in that grant. I can't tell. I don't remember everything that it was for, but it was programmatic. It wasn't so much to support the organization as it was to support the organization's work. And so that's when
teachers.
Getting the teachers.
And with that, you got to use money to drive them to come that way.
But it was offering like scholarships. One thing I can't say, like scholarships to individuals who had like their bachelor's degree and they wanted to go on and get a master's degree in education. So it was things like that where they were offering scholarships and offering a specific program to help them get through this accelerated program so that they can become teachers. And so it was for Hispanic males and black males.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was it. But you had said about you alluded to something that, and we talked about it before we started, about the difference in, how do you fund the operations? And there are two different types of, well, there's more than two, but the main two different types of grants are there's general operating support and then there's program support.
Okay.
So your general operating support is basically what keeps the lights on. It pays the administrative, executive administrative staff. It pays for things that are not necessarily program related expenses. So for example, with the example of like a food program, like a program that might feed youth. So your program dollars are going to cover the food, they're going to cover the supplies that you need, they're going to pay for staff who are actually engaged in that program. So that's your program dollars. Your general operating support is going to pay for the president, the vice president, the accounting people, the people who have to do something in order to get that program to work.
Say that again. Go ahead one more time.
So it's general operating support. That's for the people who are not necessarily assigned, like on the ground doing the work. They're in the back office, making sure that you're legal, making sure that your bills are paid. So the finance team, the communications and marketing team, the administrative staff, the executive staff, the people who are not, in the kitchen cooking the food, serving the food. So those are the people that a general operating support grant would cover that.
Okay.
Now, generally, those are more difficult to get.
Okay.
But there was a shift with COVID. There was a shift in general operating support, just because what was happening was that with nonprofits who were serving individuals, the needs shifted. So for example, programs that might have been after school programs that may have had to shut their doors, they still had a need to provide, some of those kids were coming there and they were eating there.
Okay.
So with COVID, funders sort of eased up on those requirements and they said, you know what, just use the money how you feel like that money needs to be used. And some have started to kind of return to that program, but others have not. Others have, kept on, saying, okay, we're going to switch to general operating support. But the good thing about general operating support is that, you know what money you need and you know how to use it. So it gives you a lot more autonomy over how to use that money.
Than someone in theory who's coming up with this is what the money should be used for, but in practical application is totally different when at the ground level when you're out there every day.
Right, and because what happens particularly with a program grant is that even though there are people who are on the ground doing the work, somebody in the office has got to be ordering the food.
Absolutely.
Somebody's got to be doing the taxes to make sure that you're legal. Somebody's got to make sure that, you're promoting that program. There's somebody in the office who's doing that. And so program funds don't cover that. The general operating support covers that. And so that's why it's necessary. And I think that the philanthropic field, particularly foundations, they're starting to recognize that we need to, it's called trust-based philanthropy. We're, trusting the organization to use the money to do the right thing. Exactly.
So earlier when you were telling us about the background and we have to do the research, who would we hire if you have a nonprofit? Would you do all of that legwork to do the research? Or would you hire someone to help you to do that research, to put into the proposal? How does that work?
That depends on your time and how much money you have to hire somebody to do it.
Okay.
So if you have the time to do the research, you can definitely do the research. There, with the internet, you can find just about anything, statistics on anything. You can find, again, the census is a very good place to go for establishing a need for your program. SCORE, which is through the SBA, the Small Business Administration, the U.S. Small Business Administration. They have a ton of resources that you can look at and they're free. SCORE is free. So I would suggest for someone to connect with SCORE, let them know what it is that you want to do. And they have workshops and all kinds of things that you can participate in for free. And then you can get a better idea of what the level of effort is to start. And then you can make that determination as to whether it's something that you can do or whether you are going to need to hire somebody.
Yeah, because I'm thinking in terms of an entrepreneur, they may not have that time or that knowledge base to say, hey, you know what, let me do everything that I need to do to research to get this grant. Whereas more of a professional, they would tend to know these are the things that we need to actually research rather than trying to, that's what I would do.
Okay. Well, there are some tools. I mean, there are tools, especially as it relates to getting grants. There are tools that you can use to get grants. There are websites. There's one tool that I love. It's called Foundation Directory Online. It's fee-based. It's about $1,500 a year.
Foundation
Directory Online.
Directory Online.
And the parent company is Candid, CANDID.
Okay.
And they have, they've got to have over 100,000 funders in the database. And you can search specifically on, so if you wanted to start a program in Prince George's County that was for victims of domestic violence.
Okay.
You could drill down, you can put in search codes and drill down to organizations, and if you even wanted to drill it down even further, to organizations that serve Hispanic women, you could drill down and put those search criteria in, and it will come up with a list of all the organizations.
Wow.
Let's see, the thing is that I can't remember what the statistic is, but there are less than half of foundations, strictly philanthropic organizations, less than half of them have websites. You know, so a tool like Foundation Directory Online is very valuable because they give you like the board list, the list of providers on the board. They give you the phone number, address, what kind of grants they give out, whether it's program support, whether it's what's called seed funding. Seed funding is when you want to start something. Okay. That's very difficult to get, seed funding.
Okay.
You can. They give you the range of grants. Well, their grants are usually between $5,000 and $20,000, or they're between $100,000. They will tell you how many, like over, say for 2021, they gave 5 grants that were $5,000, 10 grants that were $20,000. They break it down.
They break it down.
And what that helps you with is when you're going after grants, especially if you do have to, when you're new, sometimes you do have to go after things blind. You have all of this information. You know, okay. So they funded this organization that's similar to ours, and they gave them $10,000, even though they gave this other organization $50,000. Maybe we shouldn't ask for $50,000 because we don't do exactly what they do, but we're closer to this. So maybe we should ask for that. So using Foundation Directory Online as a tool to understand who to ask money for, what they're looking for. You can see all of the grants that they've given over a certain period of time.
Wow.
And you can look, in that way, if you think, well, maybe we fit what it is that I want to do fits within their priority areas, you can look at what they funded. And if you see, you'll see a pattern in what they funded. And if you see that nothing really looks like what you do, that's probably not the best place,
to try to get the funding from that particular. Okay.
Yeah, you want to look at organizations that have, that have given grants to organizations that are similar to what it is that you do, and they have an expressed, they call them priority areas. They have an expressed priority area that relates to what it is that you're looking to do.
So if a person has a vision, they don't know, they just know that they want to help this particular group of people, and they don't have any help. They don't have anybody that they know that could staff people. And how do you get started? Like, is it?
That's a good question.
Yeah, because if you see a need and you're looking around like, okay, I haven't seen anybody with this, and there is a need.
Okay.
How do you get started with?
I think the first thing to do is to establish that need. So looking to see that need is one thing, but having some data to show that there's a need is another.
Okay.
So I would look and see. With the Census Bureau, look at local government. If you want to meet a specific need in a specific geography, go to that county's website and see what statistics and what information you can find that shows what you need. Get anecdotal information. A quote from somebody who has a need is very powerful. You know, it's not good enough to get a grant, but it gets someone's attention. So having someone talk about someone who's, you know, maybe a victim of domestic violence who has not, you know, they don't have any place to go because they have children, particularly like teenage boys. They're often not allowed in shelters because of safety issues. So, you know, this is a need that I have. You know, having someone talk about what it is that they need, like a first-hand account, that's very powerful. But I would say get your data together. Get your data together so that you can say, this is a documented need in this community, and we need to do that. In terms of staffing it, I think even before you get to that point, you need to develop sort of like a business plan where you've done your market analysis. You want to show that there's nobody out there that's doing that, because there might be some other organizations, even if they're peripheral to what it is that you're doing, but they're not necessarily meeting that need because it's not their niche. So you have that, you have all of that data. So when I'm talking about data, I'm not just talking about there are this many women within this county that need the service. I'm also talking about there are 2 service providers who do this to meet all of these women, so we need more. So getting your data together is very, very important. And writing up some sort of, whether it's a business plan or some type of, you know, developing your mission statement, developing your vision statement. What are your goals and objectives? What is it that you want to do? You know, have very concrete goals and objectives. Year 1, I want to just start.
Okay,
You
so
know what I mean?
it's similar to starting a business.
Yeah, similar to starting a business. You also do want to get your nonprofit status, and you get that through the IRS.
Okay.
So that's where they ask. We have a lot of information that you have to fill out, and you would apply through the IRS to be what's called a 501c3 organization, and that makes you a nonprofit. And then most foundations, most philanthropic entities will ask for your IRS determination letter when you apply for a grant. So you want to make sure that you have that.
Okay.
So if we're looking for more of a professional to, I guess, assist us into writing the grant, what questions should we ask either a company or a grant writer to assist us? How do we know if that grant writer is a good fit for us?
I would ask for samples of their work.
Okay.
Usually they will have to redact them because the grant applications are confidential. For the most, generally they're confidential. So you may want to ask for samples of their work. Referrals are always great. There's an organization, the name is slipping my mind. But there are professional grant writing associations that have grant writers who have been vetted, you know, and so if they have a certain credential, generally speaking, they're if they have that credential, generally speaking, they're good. But I would ask, you know, I would ask for samples. I would look at what it is that you're trying to do. Like, do you want to go after federal grant? Because someone who writes federal grants, writing a federal grant and a state grant, government grants, that's a beast. Those are completely different from a foundation grant.
Okay.
Completely different.
And then are you niched down from there to whether it's a support grant, a program grant, or a seed funding grant? Are there specific writers who write for those specifics, or they generally will write?
Yeah, I think they would be able to write for all of them.
Okay.
You know, I think if they're a good grant writer, they could write across whether it's general operating, whether it's program, whether it's seed funding. But I think for federal grants, it's a higher level of there's a lot, especially when you're dealing with the budget, and we haven't even talked about the budget yet. That's a huge thing too. But those grants are generally a lot of work. I mean, they want very specific information. Like I said, the RFPs themselves are, 50, 60, 70 pages of information that you have to review. Now, your reply is usually somewhere generally between 25 and 50 pages. But they want attachments, they want resumes, they want bios, they want, your budget, if you've you have what's called an audit. When you're a nonprofit organization, you get audited. If you've made a certain amount of money, you have to have an audit. They want copies of your audit to make sure your audit is clean and that you don't have any findings on your audit and that you're using your money the way that you say that you're using your money. So there are a lot of things with a federal grant. And there are foundations that ask for that information as well. But yeah, so if you know that you want to go after federal grants, I would definitely try to find someone who has that experience and ask for, possibly redacted a sample of what they've done.
Well, Tracy and I was having this conversation a little earlier, and I think you may have covered it just on the surface of it, because you may have 40 people going after this one grant. So, and I had a question that's written out here. Now I'm wondering, should you just, if 40 people are after this one grant, should you go in another direction, or what is one good tip to kind of beat those other 40 people to get your grant ready? Because everyone wants their grant, or their proposal, to be read. What are one or two tips that you could help us out to get your proposal read so you can get the funds?
Okay.
Because, wait a minute, I'm sorry, excuse me. Do they read every one?
Yes.
Wow.
I think so. I think in some cases they may not, but there are ways that you can get yours on the top of the pile.
Okay.
And there are, again, statistics that show that 80% of it is who you know and the relationships that you have. And so if you're going after...
so this is how to get to the top of the pile.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what we want to know.
And so if you want to... You want to get to know the people that you're submitting the grant to. So, for example, if you're going after a foundation, there are plenty of local foundations in the DC area. You'll want to try to set up an appointment with the program officer. You want to talk to them about your program. They can tell you whether your program is a good fit. They can tell you, they'll say, I don't think this is a good fit for us. And good program officers will tell you, maybe you need to apply to this organization, or this is what you need, and come back in a year. So they will be honest with you about whether, they don't want to have to read 500 applications where 400 of them don't meet. They got to read all that. So they don't want to read things that they know are not, going to, are not going to pass. So that's very important. Get to know your program officer. Let them know what your program is. Make sure that you send them, that there's a cultivation process. So once you meet with them one time, I would not meet with somebody and then a month later put in an application. You want to meet with them. You want to send out, cultivate that relationship. Maybe a month later, send like an update about what you're doing. Send an email. Send an update. You may want to start a newsletter, that you're sending to all of your prospective funders, so that you're staying on their radar.
Right.
And then you want to call them back. Call them back in maybe 2 months' time and just talk to them again. Has anything changed? How are you doing? Just kind of want to touch base and let you know we've done this, we've done that, and just make sure that you keep the lines of communication open. So when the grants come in and they see your organization, they will remember your organization from some of those who just kind of submitted a grant and didn't have any relationship.
Right. Okay. So the follow up.
Right, the follow-up is important. That relationship, just developing that relationship is huge.
Wow, okay.
And even with government, they have different types of grants for government, and one is called discretionary funds, where it's basically they have like formula type grants where you have to meet a specific criteria to get those grants. Then they have discretionary grants, which you have to meet certain criteria, but much of it is at the discretion of the people who are reviewing or the program officer or the person over that program. Okay. So you want to get to know those people. A lot of those decisions are made. As quiet as it's kept, a lot of decisions are made, not just at the government level, but even in the foundation level. They're made through relationships. Okay. Because they
makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense. And it shows that you're really interested in
it does.
It
shows that you value them as a funder.
And calling them.
It shows
It
that you
speaks
value.
highly about yourself.
Yeah, that you're actually willing to do the work to
put it in.
to put it in, rather than just submitting a piece of paper and saying, I want some money.
Yeah.
I have an idea.
Send them a card.
Yeah, who's cutting the check? When I pick up the check?
Holiday come around, send a card.
So how long does it take to put a grant proposal together? Average time?
It depends on the grant. Again, like for a federal grant, a federal grant, really you want to allot, if you can allot a couple of months for that, because you generally are going to need a team of people to put that together. And I'm talking about an organization that's established. You'll want, your program people, the people who are doing the work on the ground, they would need to tell you how the program is actually run. So generally with government grants, they have, you're going to have to do research on the need. You're going to have to read the RFP and outline it. You're going to have to figure out what it is that they're asking for. And that can take a couple of hours just to read through carefully that 50, 60, 70, 80 page RFP, and outline. You're going to have to read it a couple of times. Generally, they have what's called a pre-bid conference. So they will go, it's like a webinar where you can go and just log on and you can submit questions in advance and they'll talk about what it is that they're looking for. And again, like even with the government, they pay grant reviewers to come in and review their grants for the most part. But, they don't want to have a whole bunch of stuff coming in that, they know is not good.
Absolutely.
So when when you go to the pre-bid conference, you can have your questions answered and it helps you understand, well, am I qualified for this? And backing up a little bit, there's one thing to be qualified, and you can be qualified for something in terms of meeting the qualifications, that you have to be located in Prince George's County, you have to have your nonprofit status, and you have to have a budget of $1 million or more per year, okay? That's one thing, you meet the qualifications. It's another thing to be responsive to what they're asking. So even though you're qualified, you may not be responsive, if that makes sense. Responsive is, can I do what they're asking me to do, and can I do it well, and can I do it better than everybody else? So that's the responsive piece, and that's when you're writing your grant, when you're writing the narrative piece of your grant, the program description, your management, the management piece where you're talking about your staffing, where you're talking about your back office operations. You want to show that not only are you qualified, but that you are responsive to what the government really wants you to do. If that makes sense. Yeah. So it's not enough. If you only meet qualified, you need to make that. Yeah, you need
to go a little more in depth,
deeper than that.
Well, if you're looking to hire a grant writer or a grant team, what are some of the costs associated, or how much should someone be looking at to hire a grant writer?
Well, grant writers in this area, they can be as low as like maybe $60 an hour up to $200 an hour. Okay. So it really depends on the experience. It depends on the type of grant that you're looking for. It also depends on what you have. Like if you have information already and they're just coming in to compile and edit and put a spin on it, that's one thing. But if you don't have anything and you're doing it from scratch, it can be, from a time standpoint, it can be time consuming. But also the skill level that's required for something like that is a little bit higher than someone who's coming in and just taking something that you already have and putting that spin or that niche kind of focus to it so that it matches the RFP.
So am I looking at, if they're, I think we talked about maybe a couple of months that it takes to get the proposal together. So are they charging you 8 hours a day for? Oh, okay.
Well, if they do, no, they should not be charged. You should develop a contract with them.
Okay.
You should develop a contract. In the beginning, you can give them, like you can give them, the RFP or whatever it is that and they may want, they may be interested in taking a look at it. But what I would do is make sure that you have a contract that stipulates either an hourly rate, or you can do a retainer. And so most of my contracts were retainer contracts, because that helps the grant writer understand, if you want me to do this on a regular basis, you need to reserve my time.
Mm.
Yeah. So you may do like, say, 40 hours a month. And generally when you're on a retainer, they may discount the rate a little bit because that's guaranteed income that you're going to get.
Okay.
But you want to make sure when you do a retainer that it works for you, because you don't want to put a retainer at 100 hours a month when all you really need is 25 or 30 hours a month. Because if you're on that retainer, you're going to pay them. You have to
Regardless.
pay them, right? So yeah.
Wow. Is there anything that you feel that we've missed because by us being
There's
novice?
so much.
Oh my God! Please tell me.
Gosh, I mean, I just think about we talked a lot about grants.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much just as it relates to funding an organization. People think about grants and corporate sponsorships and like getting money from institutions, but we don't always think about getting money from individuals. And there are, again, statistics that show in the philanthropy field that upwards of 60 to 70% of nonprofits are funded by individuals. Wow. Meaning, when you go online and you see, crowdfunding where this is very popular around Giving Tuesday, where you'll see people post things to Facebook. I'm raising money for whatever, or for my birthday, I'm raising money for this. Instead of giving me a give to this. Those kinds of things. I'm not so much talking about the GoFundMe kind of stuff. I'm talking about, organized crowdfunding type things. And then you have people who have deep pockets. You've got people who have deep pockets, particularly athletes, celebrities, and then other people who are just established business people who are philanthropic. Most foundations many foundations were established from people who had money. Think about the Capers Foundation in D.C. Capers, they were builders. They had money, the other one, it was another builder, and it's escaping my name right now, my mind right now. But there are families that have money, and then you have like family foundations, which are similar. They're where the family sits on the board, and the family actually makes a decision about. They establish a foundation for tax purposes, but it's really the family that's giving out that money. And so generally, what happens is they have like a family office, and each family member has like a pot of money that they can decide on. So there's finding those deep pockets, and in this area. There are deep pockets in this area, so there are deep pockets.
Which one of the best ways to do it is to simply word of mouth, networking?
Word of mouth, word of mouth is a good way. But again, there are also tools that you can use. Where there's something called Wealth Engine, and they cost money, of course. But they have people who they follow people with money. I don't know where they get this information.
WealthEngine.com?
I think it's wealthengine.com.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And then there's one called Donor Search.
Donor Search, okay.
And they actually they do wealth screenings of individuals. And they can actually tell you not only how much money they have, they can tell you how much money they've given, where they've given it, who they've given it to, how much they give per year. They can tell you this is how much they've given, but this is their capacity to give. They can, I don't know where they get all this information from, but they have details about where the money is. And so that's a good way to get started. But really word of mouth, networking, being engaged, finding where people have money, where are those people frequenting, and frequenting those places so that you're making connections, and again, looking at generally, if you look at the larger foundations and you look at the board list, look at the people who are on those boards, who do they know, who are they connected to, getting on LinkedIn, looking at different people who have different, people who own companies, looking at that. And the other place to get, and this is much more difficult to break into, but there's something there are people who have money that want to set their money aside, and they set it in something that's called a donor advised fund. And so what a donor advised fund is, and this is a very simplistic explanation of a donor advised fund, is people who want to give out their money and they want to shield it for tax purposes. So they have wealth advisors like Fidelity, Wells Fargo, places like that, like wealth advisors that will look into different organizations. Like they'll say, I'm interested in individuals with disabilities and helping them. So they'll look at different programs in the area. And then the wealth advisor will call and say, set up a meeting. And they'll actually call and set up a meeting with you to talk to them about what you offer and to see if you're a right fit. And sometimes they may ask you for a grant application and you put in your grant application, but it's not an institution giving you that money. This is money that's actually coming from someone who has deep pockets. Who has
So
money
much money out here.
Yeah, there's a lot of money. It's just finding that money, and it's not easy. Individual funding is more difficult. It's hard because you got to find out where that money is. So it is sometimes hard to get to that. But what happens is once you can get someone in your corner. People with money know people with money.
Right.
And they like what you're doing. You enlist them as a champion to help you raise funds. And many times they will do that. If you establish that relationship with them and they really are invested in your cause. And again, that's where, when I talked about earlier, trying to learn what it is that moves the funder. There are people who are interested in the bottom line, how much impact is my money making? And then there are other people who are moved by the fact that they're helping somebody. So when you're approaching individual funders, you don't want to, if someone's really concerned about the bottom line, that beautiful brochure, that video with the puppy dog that's crying, they're not interested in that.
So that's real good. That's real good.
They want to see, with $25, we can feed 10 families. That's what they want to see. Okay. So targeting your marketing and how you're approaching someone based on what their interests are. And that's about the relationship. You don't just automatically know what's going to move somebody. You have to develop that relationship to know what it is.
So right, because that would come through from the RFP, reading that, setting up a meeting, having to sit down with them, finding out what moves them, and then you could actually write your final proposal based on, because you already, from what I'm hearing, is you already have a template of what it is that you're going to say, and then after you have that conversation, then you can drill down and say, okay, well, let me tailor this to exactly what they want.
And that would be like that. In that case, it would be a little bit different. If you're dealing with like an organization, like an institution, you want to find out what moves when you're replying with a grant to an RFP to a foundation or to the government. You want to find out what moves that organization. Okay. And they usually have on their website, if they have a website, what their priority areas are. So they might say the environment, education, and domestic violence. And so you would know that your program isn't, if you're feeding homeless families, that's not the place you want to go, because they're, but if you're talking about cleaning up the bay, if you want to clean up the Chesapeake Bay, environment, that's some place you would want to go. So look at their priority areas to see if it's even worth approaching it. So much time can be saved if you do the research on the front end before you even call somebody. Yeah. So.
Well, I know that you were saying that you don't specifically write any grants, but you said you could help us out as far as giving us some resources of how to someone who may can help us out if we're looking at it.
I can definitely I have some friends who write grants, colleagues who write grants, and I can give you some resources to look at. And it's a grant professional. It's GPCA. It's GPCA.com.
Grant professional.
I just cannot think of what it is.
Just write it down.
GPCA.
And it's like a certification that you can get in grant writing, and they generally have lists of people that that would do that. And then there are people, offline. I can definitely give you some like people who I could refer you to.
Okay.
And if, I'm more than happy to give my email address.
Yeah, yes, can you?
Sure, yep. It's Lynn, Lynne, at equityandimpact.net. So Lynn, Lynne, at equityandimpact.net. Feel free to send me an email. Let me know that you saw the podcast and that you're interested in getting someone to write a grant or just more information. I'm glad to just provide some information to you. So whatever it is that you need, just give me a call. Come and send me an email. I'll be glad to help.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you ladies ask one more question. I'm going to look over here for my 60 seconds of fire. So we're going to finish up with the 60 seconds of fire.
I think she nailed it.
Was that helpful? I mean, was
It was very helpful.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a broad topic. I mean,
It is very
and just
broad.
fundraising.
But we
in
didn't talk
general.
about for-profit businesses.
Okay.
And I mean, that could just be a
That's
brief.
a different, and that really is not as much my forte as the nonprofit. Yeah, so that's.
But that's difficult money to
Well,
get.
you would get for profits, depending on the type. It depends on what it is that you're doing. Are you providing a service? Like, is it a fee for service where you're doing something and people are paying you to do what you want to do? Is it a product that you're developing? So it really depends on what it is what kind of company you want to start. Yeah. Or is it like a government contractor? That's contracts. So
Right.
I would definitely recommend SCORE and SBA for that because they have programs such as the 8A program for minority and women-owned businesses.
Yeah.
It's called the 8A program, and there's like a preference that you get. You would have to, again, this is where you have to give all this information to sign, to register. And there's a vetting process to make sure that you actually are a minority-owned business, that 51% has to be owned by someone who fits into certain categories. And then there are government grants that are set aside, government grants and government contracts that are set aside specifically for minority businesses. So you don't have to compete with everybody else. You're competing with a smaller pool of candidates. But you still have to show that you can do what they say. You still have to put in good stuff.
Well, guys, we're going to go through this 60 seconds of fire. And before we do that, I want you to make sure you stay tuned because we're going to have on a future episode government contracting and how we can get into government contracting. Yeah, so that was going to be fire. That was going to be fire. So we're going to finish up here with Lynn. We got 60 seconds of fire. This is maybe one or two words, maybe tops of maybe a sentence or two. Okay, so the first one is, what do you believe your greatest invisible asset is? When I say invisible asset, meaning trustworthy, loving, happiness, generosity, kindness, peace, freedom, etc. What do you believe your greatest invisible asset is?
I would say, generally speaking, I get along with everybody. Generally speaking, I get along, just being kind-hearted and just, being able to adapt to different people's personalities and not judge, just being,
Okay. What is your biggest but in life or in business? What do you believe your biggest but is?
Wow. That's a hard one. Gosh, I don't know. I really can't answer that.
Okay.
Can we come back to that?
We'll come back to that one.
Okay.
We'll come back to that one.
Okay.
And the last one is complete this sentence. Life is about
Love. Life is about love. It is.
So I'm going to let you go with the other question. But here's the last question. For our next guest, we were going to ask you to tell us what question we should ask our next guest. That's going to be one of our first questions that we ask our next guest.
I would say, what inspired you to do what you do?
Okay. What inspired you to do what you do? All right. What you do. There we go. So we have that one down. Well, guys, it's another great episode. We're just getting this thing started for this year. So if you want to reach out to us, please go over to BS4 entrepreneurs.com. Hit the subscribe button. We're trying to hit our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers, so you can definitely help us get there. We're going to bring you, the more you do that, the more we can bring you These phenomenal guests bring you extremely great content to help you build. I'm Frankie P.
I'm Maria P.
I'm Tracy P.
And we have Miss Lynn Matthews, the great Lynn Matthews. So we're going to get out of here. Remember, you change your perspective, you change your life. When you change your perspective, you change your life. When you change your perspective, if you want to get into grant writing, make sure you please reach out to Lynn. And guess what's going to happen, guys? You're going to change your life. Peace. We out of here.
Love it.
Thank you, Miss